you. Thank you so much. It's so good to see a full room tonight. I told Victor, I was like, we're competing with the sun, so I don't know what the outcome's going to be, but hang in there. I'm going to start tonight with a land acknowledgement. I am a grateful but uninvited visitor to the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, past and present, including the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations and the Duwamish peoples. I acknowledge the land on which I live, learn, and practice as Coast Salish land. And I recognize that this land acknowledgement is to be one small act in an ongoing process of understanding and opposing the systematic oppression and historic and contemporary erasure of indigeneity and indigenous peoples. We are on stolen land. Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Yvette Moy, and I'm the University of Washington's Director of Public Lectures, and I'm so happy that you're here with us this evening. And tonight we're going to welcome journalist and author Victor Luckerson. I also understand we have some honor students with us tonight. Where are you? Shout out. I saw you. There you are. Thanks for coming, you guys. I also want to thank our campus supporters, including the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. Thank you. The School of Social Work, the Department of History, the Department of, thank you, American Ethnic Studies. I feel like it's graduation, like I should wait. The College of the Built Environments, Department of Political Science, there we go. The Honors Program, a little louder from you guys, come on now. I know you guys are out there. And the Center for Studies in Demography and Ecology. Yay! Okay, guys. So we have a few housekeeping items to go through really quickly. If you haven't done so already, could you please silence your cell phones? And we ask that you refrain from video or audio recording this evening's lecture. We are video recording and we are live streaming. The video will be available on the Office of Public Lectures YouTube page in about 48 hours post the event. We ask that you not take photographs while our speakers are on the stage. Our student assistant, Kavya, will take a few photographs. You'll see her at the very beginning. As you know, we have to take photos for social media or it didn't happen. So hang in there with us. This evening, you can ask questions via Slido. We have I think the slide was up just a few minutes ago. And you can scan the QR code and you can send that in if you feel shy. If you're feeling emboldened, you may come to the microphone and ask your question directly, but we just ask that you ask your question in the form of a question, please. You know who I'm talking about. This evening, Mr. Luckerson will be signing books just over here, stage left. So please stick around if you would like to get your book signed. And then this evening's guest will be introduced by the University of Washington's Associate Dean for Research and Engagement, as well as the Daniel J. Evans Professor of Social Policy at the Daniel J. Evans School of Public Policy and Governance, my alma mater, Dr. Scott Allard. And as Dr. Allard makes his way to the stage, I'd like you to take a minute to say hello to your neighbors and introduce yourselves and make a friend tonight.
Well, friends, that was great. That was kind of like going to church there for a second. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. What juice we got in the room? What energy? What warmth? I'll tell you what. So I'm Scott Allard, faculty at the Evans School and Associate Dean for Research and Engagement there. I tell you, that made my day. I mean, and having Victor here this week has brought a lot of warmth and light to our community. I feel like it's a time when we need every ray of light we can get, and so I'm really happy to have him here tonight. And just the energy you have here is just awesome. Victor Luckerson is a journalist and author who works to bring neglected Black history to light. A native of Montgomery, Alabama, Victor attended the University of Alabama. Roll Tide, not high tide. Studying journalism and history there, he served as the second ever Black editor-in-chief of the school's campus newspaper, the Crimson White. Under Victor's leadership, the newspaper covered issues ranging from entrenched racism in the Greek system to corrupt politics and student government. The most challenging assignment was grappling with the devastating tornado that ravaged the city of Tuscaloosa and a wide area of the South on April 27, 2011. It was there, and for the first time, he and many of his friends were forced to make sense of tragedy. After college, Victor worked for 7 years as a technology and business reporter, first at Time Magazine and later at the media startup The Ringer. That's where we met. Get the archive. He is someone to read and to follow. He covered how the ascendant tech giants were transforming both physical and digital spaces, from Airbnb gentrifying neighborhoods to Facebook warping social discourse through the creation of the like button. But Victor never really loved writing about corporations, and you know this if you spend time with him. He preferred to write about real people, and that's what this book is about. That's what his work is all about. In particular, he was always looking for more chances to tell Black people's stories. In 2018, Victor wrote a feature story for The Ringer about Tulsa's historic Greenwood district, also known as Black Wall Street, and the 1921 Race Massacre that left that neighborhood and many people's lives in ruins. He soon realized that a single article just didn't really do justice, barely scratched the surface of all that had transpired in Greenwood over its long history. And so in 2019, he quit his job at The Ringer and moved to Tulsa to pursue a nonfiction book project about Greenwood, chronicling the neighborhood stories from its frontier origins to its place as a modern symbol of Black success. The project became the 2023 publication Built from the Fire, and it's a real achievement of not just love and warmth, but intellectual heft. It's really something. It has received many awards and accolades, including being named one of the 100 notable books of the year by the New York Times, and one of the 50 best nonfiction books of the year by the Washington Post. So just great book. Congratulations. And he's just getting started. More important than the awards, the book was embraced by many of the people from Greenwood who allowed Victor to tell a bit of their stories. After the book's release, Victor organized a citywide community read in Tulsa in partnership with local colleges, libraries, and Black-owned businesses, and kind of spending time in different places and kind of engaging different parts of the book in different places. It's a really smart way to connect to community. Currently, Victor is busy at work on his second book project. He travels the country speaking about the history of Greenwood at colleges and venues such as the Smithsonian's National Museum of African History and Culture. He also continues to work as a journalist, freelancing for outlets such as The New Yorker, The New York Times, and the Smithsonian Magazine. Please join me in welcoming Victor Luckerson to the stage.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank y'all for coming out. This is a huge crowd. That's really exciting for me. Was anybody here at Elliott Bay event in 2023 when I was in Seattle? Any? Yeah, okay, we got a few folks from Elliott Bay. This is my second time being in Seattle talking about this work, which is really exciting, but also we're in a very different political moment now than when I came here in June 2023. And, my words will reflect that. First off, some thank yous. This is kind of a long list. A lot of people are involved in this visit. Thank you to the Graduate School, the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance, the School of Social Work, the Department of History, the Department of American Ethnic Studies, the College of Built Environments, the Department of Political Science, the Honors Program, and the Center for Studies in Demography and Ecology. Thank you all. And special thanks to Scott Allard, who was the first person I connected with here at UW. Me and Scott actually talked for the first time when I was writing a piece for The Ringer about sort of a Seattle politics and gentrification, these dynamics. So Scott kind of helped me give me the lay of the land here. And then we sort of kept being in contact through my newsletter. So it took us a while to get here, but thank you so much, Scott, for helping to make this happen. The last thing I want to say before I really get into it is I think it's really important to be able to have this kind of conversation during Black History Month. This might be the last Black History Month, who knows? But to be serious about things, being able to sort of talk about this history in community with other people and talk honestly about our country's story is really, really vital. And so I'm going to at least continue to do this kind of discussion and talk no matter what happens in our country politically, and hope all of you will engage in these narratives as well. So thank you so much for being here. "187 words. That's the number of words it took to spark the destruction of a community. The headline was exaggerated. The descriptions were salacious. The facts were wrong. And the damage, it was permanent. When journalists at the Tulsa Tribune published a front-page article falsely accusing a Black teenager of attempted rape, They helped set off a series of events that would lead to the destruction of one of the most prominent black business districts in America. The article was not a one-time error. It was part of a pattern of fear-mongering, paranoia, and sensationalism, geared to making white Tulsans angry and distrustful toward their black neighbors. It was precisely the wrong way to practice journalism, but it was all too common across the country at the time in the white press. This article later wound up missing from the Tulsa Tribune archives. Once the gravity of this mistake was fully understood, someone literally tried to rip it from the pages of history. But let's take a step back. How was a blatant lie about a black man published in a newspaper that's supposed to uphold the truth? Why was this hateful lie so easily believed by so many white people in Tulsa? And how did Tulsa's black residents, the people of Greenwood, respond to this torrent of dangerous misinformation? To understand how Tulsa slid into catastrophe, we must first understand how Greenwood came to be. In the early 1900s, Oklahoma was a place where black people thought they could have a fresh start. As Jim Crow policy seized the Deep South with an ever-tightening grip, Oklahoma was seen as a promised land for black people. It was a place where 3/4 of black farmers owned their acreage, and more than 80% of black people could read. Between 1900 and 1920, Oklahoma's black population tripled as people trekked to the state however they could, on crowded trains or weary-covered wagons. A few even came on foot. While these brave migrants sought steady jobs and bountiful farmland, many of them also desired good schools for their children, places where the seeds of prosperity could be sown in the one terrain that could not be burned, stolen, or erased by an interloper, the terrain of the mind. Greenwood ultimately became Black Oklahoma's brightest star of all. Imagine living in a place where most of the teachers in your high school had master's degrees. That was true in Greenwood. Imagine living in a place where black people owned their land rather than renting it. That was true in Greenwood. Imagine living in a place where wealth was not the defining metric of success, but community involvement was. That was true in Greenwood. If we were in the old Greenwood right now, I'd be talking to United Town Hall Seattle, but at Mount Zion Baptist Church, which is built in the heart of the neighborhood with 70,000 bricks and a countless number of prayers. After this talk, we'd head to dinner at Susie Bell's Cafe at 106 North Greenwood Avenue, where Miss Bell's smothered chicken was a neighborhood delicacy. Once the meal was done, we'd catch a vaudeville show at the Dreamland Theater, where lines snaked around the block every Friday night. And just maybe, after that, we'd sing into a dim bar like the Zulu Lounge, where ragtime music dominated the piano, and a substance called chalk beer looked like grapefruit juice, but tasted like a real good time. We meet women like Lula Williams, the infamous amusement queen, who owned the Dreamland Theater and a leopard print coat to go along with it. I have to tell you all a little bit more about Lula here because she's one of my favorite people to research in this book. So Lula was a very independent woman. She owned this really popular movie theater in Greenwood. And when I was doing my research, I found that she really wasn't getting the credit she deserved, to be honest. In both the black and the white press, her achievements were really obscured because of her gender. She had a husband named John Williams, who was also an entrepreneur. He got all the credit for everything that was happening in their family. So I read these articles saying, John Williams, Negro Rockefeller, John Williams, best black entrepreneur in Tulsa. She's not being mentioned at all in these articles. So I started digging a little bit deeper, and I looked through some of the property records for this movie theater she owned, and I found a signed affidavit by Lula, actually, from 1918. And this affidavit in the courthouse, she wrote, like, I, Lula Williams, own the Dreamland Theater. And she listed what she owned. I own the popcorn machine, I own the seats, I own the projector. John Williams does not own any of these items here in Run 2. This is mine. And so that really was, for me, just such an amazing document to find that showed the agency she had and sort of seized for herself in that era. So shout out to Lula for sure. In addition to Lula, we would meet men like A.C. Jackson, the genius doctor who the Mayer brothers called the most able Negro surgeon in America. Mabel Little, a beautician who was so good with hair, she even convinced a few men she could save their receding hairlines. And J.H. Goodwin, who helped build Tulsa's first black hospital. What a community contributes to you, Goodwin once wrote, can be measured only in terms of what you give back to that community. By 1921, Greenwood was filled with doctors, attorneys, writers, hoteliers, and shop owners. Here, the terrain of the mind was as verdant as a spring meadow, as Greenwood championed black entrepreneurship, black independence, black strength. Mary Jones Parrish, a local typing teacher, was one of the first people to call it the Negro's Wall Street. But more than riches, what drew Parrish to Greenwood was, quote, the wonderful cooperation I observed among our people. But this terrain that Greenwood had cultivated, it was contested. The neighborhood success stirred something dark in the minds of many white Oklahomans. Oklahoma, at its founding, had declared that black ambition and intellect were at odds with the white agenda. As a rule, Negroes are failures as lawyers, doctors, and in other professions. William Murray, a future governor of Oklahoma, said at the state's constitutional convention, "It is an entirely false notion that the Negro can rise to the equal of the white man." Not long after Murray's speech, the state chose to segregate schools, train cars, and phone booths. In Tulsa, even interracial baseball games were banned. And this image you're looking at right here is actually of the state constitutional convention. You can see William Murray, who I just quoted, standing at the podium. And if you look in the far right corner of the image and this balcony, you actually see a very small segregated spot for the black viewers. So there are two black men sitting there in a segregated section as they watch these men take away their rights in Oklahoma. All of these discriminatory laws were condoned and reinforced by the white press. In Tulsa, the two white newspapers, the Tulsa World and the Tulsa Tribune, jockeyed for attention on the newsstand each day. Each undermined black progress in their own way. The Tulsa Tribune was run by Richard Lloyd Jones, a religious crusader who insisted that Tulsa's problems with crime and vice emanated from Greenwood. The Tribune considered relations between black men and white women to be the worst vice of all. Here's a quote from the Tribune. "Here is a short creed for the Negro who honestly wants to do his part in preventing mob law and lynchings. Keep far away from white women and girls." The Tulsa World presented itself as a more moderate outlet, but that was just a facade. A managing editor for the newspaper, Glenn Condon, was a member of a wartime defense council that openly advocated the lynching of political enemies in the world's pages. "Get out the hemp," read one headline. And it wasn't just Tulsa. In the 1910s, lynchings became a regular occurrence across the Deep South and its warped appendage, Oklahoma. Race riots spread across the country during a period so bloody it became known as the Red Summer. The violence seemed to be creeping closer to Greenwood with each passing year. In the nearby town of Wagoner, when a black woman was lynched and hanged on Main Street, the local white press declared that the lynching gave the community, quote, "a peaceful and helpful appearance." Opposing lynching became the primary mission of the black press in Tulsa. Leading the charge was A.J. Smitherman, the editor of the Tulsa Star. An Alabama native, Smitherman was trained at Northwestern University and moved to Tulsa in 1913 to launch his own newspaper. He articulated the promise and peril of life as a black Oklahoman better than anyone else. For Smitherman, the work of fighting injustice went far beyond writing editorials. When 20 black homes were burned by a white mob in the small town of Dewey, Smitherman traveled there to witness the carnage for himself. He petitioned the governor to punish the white mob. During another mob attack in Bristow, he hopped on a train while the attack was still underway, intent on breaking up the mob by himself if he had to. He was consistent in his belief that no American deserved to die at the hands of a mob, no matter their race, their station, or their accused crime. "These conditions," he wrote, "are becoming very alarming, and a serious calamity is sure to follow if something is not done to force all citizens to respect the law." Now, I want us to return to where we began this talk. I want you to imagine that we're back on Greenwood Avenue. It's May 31st, 1921. The streets are once again thronged with people, but the energy is different. Fear, anxiety, anger. A black shoeshine boy named Dick Rowland has been arrested on a false accusation of attempting to rape a white woman. A salacious headline in the white newspaper offers his indictment: "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator." Everyone in Greenwood and in White Tulsa has seen the story, while the accused boy sits in the county jailhouse. Word is a group of white men and women, even children, are headed to the jail to rip Rowland from his cell and lynch him. On the streets of Greenwood, men are gathering weapons and planning a march to the courthouse, where they will protect the boy and face on any white man who gets in their way, no matter the cost. Ultimately, a group of about 75 armed black men marched to the jailhouse. Many of these men were World War I soldiers who had served the country abroad and returned with new notions of black equality. When they reached the jail, the black veterans demanded the release of Rowland, but the police refused. Soon, a black soldier and a white man scuffled over a gun, a gunshot went off, and all hell broke loose. During the night, black and white men shot at each other through the streets of downtown Tulsa. The violence was brutal. One black man was dragged behind a car with a rope around his neck. Another was shot as he ran out of a downtown alley that's surrounded by a mob brandishing knives. Members of the white mob broke into hardware stores and attempted to seize the National Guard armory. Many of them were deputized by the Tulsa Police Department. A white man named Laura Buck recalled going into the police station and being told, quote, "Get a gun and get busy, and try to get a nigger." The black men who escaped the initial shootout retreated back to Greenwood to defend their home. But the mob had something worse planned. At dawn the following morning, as many as 5,000 white Oklahomans invaded the Greenwood district, brandishing guns, kerosene, and matches. Fires were set systematically, and each blaze conjured in the twilight carried its own awful story. Over the next several hours, white Tulsa laid siege to Greenwood, destroying more than 1,200 homes, raising hundreds of businesses, and killing as many as 300 people. The most horrifying part? There were 8 stillborn babies lost in the chaos of the invasion. The Tulsa Race Massacre, as the event was later known, was one of the worst acts of racial terror in the history of the United States. And in this image that I've shown here, you can see this safe in the foreground to the right. That's actually the safe of Lula Williams, who I mentioned earlier, who had accomplished so much. Her safe was looted and pillaged like so many other objects and valuables in the community. While Greenwood still smoldered, an effort began in the white press to rewrite the story of what had just happened. Often we talk about a conspiracy of silence being attached to the massacre, but that's really not what happened, at least not initially. This is a conspiracy of noise, hateful, vengeful noise. Listen to some of these quotes. The Tulsa Tribune, June 4th, 1921. The old nigger town must never be rebuilt again. Tulsa World, June 4th, 1921. These bad niggers must be controlled by their own kind. Tulsa Tribune, June 4th, 1921. In this old nigger town, there are a lot of bad niggers, and a bad nigger is about the lowest thing that walks on 2 feet. The white press was advancing a toxic idea that Greenwood, in effect, had it coming. This was not only fueled by hate, but by economic interest. The day after the massacre, a group of white real estate men released a detailed plan to displace Greenwood residents from their homes and make room for a train depot. Their financial scheme would be easier if the people they wanted to remove were portrayed as subhuman. Meanwhile, Greenwood's ability to report the truth had been hobbled by the destruction. A.J. Smitherman, the Tulsa Star editor who I mentioned earlier, saw both his printing press and his family's home burned to the ground during the attack. A few days later, an all-white grand jury indicted him and dozens of other black men for, quote, inciting a riot, holding them responsible for the destruction of their own community. Smitherman was forced to flee Greenwood as a fugitive. He would never again live in the city. For many people, this is where the story of Greenwood ends. A proud neighborhood decimated by racial violence, never to return to its former glory. But I'm here to argue that Greenwood's story is so much bigger than those 36 hours of destruction. Black life cannot be defined by the white mob. And so I hope by the time we finish talking today, when you think of Greenwood, you won't think of angry white men wielding torches and shotguns. You think of the people who called this place home and rebuilt their lives after a cataclysm. In A.J. Smitherman's absence, new journalists emerged to tell Greenwood's story honestly. Mary Jones Parrish, the local typing teacher I mentioned earlier, had been living on Greenwood Avenue during the massacre. She watched with her own eyes as white men hauled a machine gun to the top of a grain mill across the railroad tracks and rained bullets down on her neighborhood. But instead of running away, Parrish remained in Greenwood and documented what she saw, heard, and felt. I had no desire to flee, she recalled. I forgot about personal safety and was seized with an uncontrollable desire to see the outcome of the fray. In the weeks after the attack, Parrish interviewed about 20 other massacre survivors. These are people who had seen their homes looted and fled hails of gunfire. She collected the interviews and her personal recollections in a 112-page book called Events of the Tulsa Disaster, pictured here. Parrish's book challenged many of the false narratives that Tulsa city officials were spreading about the massacre. Airplanes had been used during the attack, which authorities claimed were for reconnaissance. But Parrish and her sources said they witnessed men with rifles climb aboard the aircraft and fire down on Greenwood residents. The white-owned newspapers cast the massacre as an aberration caused by mounting lawlessness in the city. Parrish said the violence fit a broad pattern, and she connected it to recent attacks in Chicago and Washington during the Red Summer of 1919. Parrish predicted that the lawlessness that was being sanctioned in black communities would ultimately double back on white communities as well. Just as this horde of evil men swept down in the colored section of Tulsa, Parrish wrote, so will they, some future day, sweep down the homes and business places of their own race. Events of the Tulsa disaster was published in 1923, 2 years after the massacre. It was greeted with little fanfare. Few copies were printed, and the publication was ignored in Tulsa's white press. Copies of the book sat in the closets of local historians and massacre survivors, dug out on occasion as evidence of what had happened. But Parrish's work would long outlive her, as her book became the first and most visceral long-form account of what happened in Greenwood. It became a crucial primary source in later decades as the massacre became more widely remembered and analyzed. There is no book you could possibly read about these events that does not cite the events of the Tulsa disaster. It was a foundational text for our understanding of this story. She'd already been a successful educator and entrepreneur, but after the massacre, Mary Jones Parrish became something else, a truth teller. Her work illustrates how important it is for communities to be able to tell their own stories. Despite the odds, Greenwood rebuilt. Within weeks of the massacre, the neighborhood was a sea of white canvas tents. By Christmas, the tents had been replaced by hundreds of reconstructed buildings. By 1925, Greenwood was once again humming with hotels, storefronts, and the proud Dreamland Theater. Scars are there, but the neighborhood is impudent and noisy, W.B. Du Bois said during this era. It believes in itself. Greenwood enjoyed a second heyday that stretched from the 1930s to the 1950s. More than 400 businesses filled the district. Musicians from Count Basie to B.B. King to Etta James performed in black-owned music venues in Tulsa. Steak and frog legs were local delicacies. Women in pleated skirts and men in Bermuda shorts started down the stroll every Friday night. Residents proudly referred to the neighborhood as Little Harlem, and yes, the Negro's Wall Street. Greenwood's story was Black America's story. Let me give you an example. So the man pictured here is Ed Goodwin. My book actually follows his family very closely across generations. And Ed Goodwin was a high school senior at the time of the Race Massacre. The massacre occurred actually just before his graduation. He survives, goes off to Fisk University to study business, and comes back to become an entrepreneur. And he really was something of a serial entrepreneur, actually, in Greenwood. He owned a haberdashery, pictured here, a clothing store. He was an attorney later on. He owned a catfish farm, all kinds of stuff. And in my research, I found out he also was involved in a lot of illegal activities, including this game called The Numbers. Anybody here heard of The Numbers by chance? Anybody here played The Numbers? You gonna admit it? Anybody played The Numbers? So The Numbers was a game kind of similar to the modern lottery that was really popular in a lot of black communities in the mid-20th century. And so basically there would be numbers between 1 and 72, and you would pick 6 out of 6 numbers in that range. If your number's hit, you get a payout. So kind of like the lottery, but very much illegal in the 1930s in Tulsa. So, I found out he's involved in numbers, not only involved, but basically like the numbers king, the kingpin of numbers in Tulsa. He's also involved in bootlegging and all these other illegal stuff. And I was surprised by this because his family is definitely kind of a heroic civil rights kind of family. And so when I was doing all of my research, I would talk to my mom all the time, and I would sometimes call her with things I was discovering. And so I remember one day I called my mom about this, and I said, Mom, I can't believe it. This guy, Ed Goodwin, who I thought was really upstanding, he is a gambling kingpin. He was a bootlegger. He was doing all this wild stuff. Doesn't that seem crazy to you, Mom? And then my mom said, well, your granddaddy did the same thing out in Alabama, just so you know. So that was how I found out that Sylvester Bender, my grandfather, was also involved in a few illicit activities in rural Alabama around the same time, actually. But that was a good lesson for me because it kind of illustrates that, especially for black people in this era, there was no direct route to the middle class, There was no ladder, there was no red carpet. You got to climb up however you're going to climb up. And so anybody who might be thinking about researching your own family history, you may find some surprises, like I did. Ed, he's this policy king now, and he's this sort of gambling kingpin kind of person. And he started getting a lot of critical coverage, actually, in the white press in Tulsa. They were calling him the Black Mayor of Tulsa, and they sort of described his house like he's a mafia boss and all this kind of stuff. And Ed, who was a very direct kind of person, he wasn't going to put up with it. He had to find a way to clear his name. And so what he thought he could do is buy his own newspaper to kind of combat their propaganda with his own, essentially. And so in 1937, Ed purchases a newspaper, the Oklahoma Eagle. It was a black newspaper that had been founded in Greenwood just before the Race Massacre. And even though Ed personally admitted to buying the newspaper for selfish reasons, he soon realized it could be an avenue for improving the world in which his family, his neighbors, and his fellow black Americans all lived. When Ed became the editor, he added an inspiring slogan to the Eagle's masthead: "We make America better when we aid our people." Over the next few decades, the Eagle would cover everything from the lack of wartime jobs for black people during World War II to the evolution of the Civil Rights Movement. So I have to say that for me, some of my favorite articles to research and uncover were more about the social life of Greenwood. Here we have actually one of those, a few of those on the next slide, I guess it is. Yeah, so here we have some of the social aspects. I know we have a lot of researchers in the audience today, and anybody who's ever sort of looked at an old newspaper from the 40s, 50s, 60s, it's like we're looking at a Facebook feed, basically. The number of just sort of comings and goings you see about people's lives is just, I've always just found it so entertaining and fascinating. And so in the Eagle, on the front page, you always have the big news of the day, World War II, Civil Rights Movement, all these issues. But inside, every week, Ed's wife, Jean, wrote a gossip column called Scoopin' the Scoop. And his daughter, Joanna, wrote a teenage gossip column called Teen Tattle. And so sometimes you think it can be sort of dismissed as frivolous. But I think, first of all, for us as historians, those items are really valuable for finding out how people lived on a day-to-day basis. And at the time, that was really the connective glue of the community. You can't only connect people through crisis or trauma or drama. It has to also be about sort of love and connection. And I think a lot of times these social columns are really essential to that. And so it was really fortunate I got to research all this. Miss Joanne, who is the one who wrote the Teen Tattle column, she was a little bit, when I put this in the book, she was like, "Why are you putting this in the book with me, Victor? I accomplish all this stuff. You got me doing a gossip column." But again, I think there's a lot of value in it. So, but despite Greenwood's ability to come roaring back from destruction, it could not escape the gears of so-called progress as the century wore on. In the 1960s, a slippery new term called urban renewal wormed its way into government lexicon. The idea was to revitalize urban communities and provide better living conditions for residents. But in reality, neighbors like Greenwood were labeled as blighted, and the people living there were forced to move miles away to make room for projects serving whiter, wealthier residents. Ed Goodwin's family was forced to leave their home on Greenwood Avenue, while the Oklahoma Eagle office was demolished to make room for an interstate highway. By 1975, only half a block remained of what had once been the most successful black business district in America. And this image is actually of the Eagle. So the Eagle was demolished on one side of Greenwood, but instead of leaving, they moved across the street. And so this is when they rebuilt the Eagle, surrounded by the abandoned buildings of urban renewal era Greenwood. As Greenwood's physical space was being destroyed, its memory was also under attack. For decades, the white press ignored every anniversary of the massacre. In the 1970s, writers who tried to uncover the truth about the event received death threats. The Nab Negro article from the Tulsa Tribune that incited this entire thing was ripped from the newspaper's archives. If you go and look up the May 31st, 1921 edition of the newspaper today, you'll find that article literally cut out of the historical record. That's what you're looking at right now. So if you go in any kind of archive today and look up this issue, you will see the article cut out of the pages. Every effort was made to suppress this history. But the black press continued to tell the story. The Eagle mentioned the massacre with increasing regularity in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. In 1971, a black-run Tulsa magazine called Impact, pictured here, published an in-depth feature about the massacre, written by a white journalist who had failed to get the story placed in the Tulsa World or the Tribune. Reading that article for the first time was how many young people in Greenwood learned about the attack on their community. Thanks to the work of truth-tellers like A.J. Smitherman, Mary Jones Parrish, and the staff of the Oklahoma Eagle, the memory of the massacre was not completely wiped out. Still, when I first arrived in Greenwood in 2018, the memory had grown hazy once again. And so just to say a little bit about how I first arrived at this story, I was working as a business reporter, as Scott mentioned in the introduction, and I really was trying to find new stories to write or new ways to sort of engage with journalism. And I remember having a lunch conversation with one of my high school friends when I was living in Atlanta in 2017. The film 12 Years a Slave came up. My friend had not seen 12 Years a Slave, didn't want to see 12 Years a Slave, and he told me he was tired of only seeing black folks being depicted being brutalized in all these historical depictions. You know, so often our role in the American narrative is to either be whipped as slaves before the Civil War, or sick by dogs during the Civil Rights Movement, and not much else. And so I asked my friend at the time, "Have you ever heard of Black Wall Street?" That's an example of us being successful. My friend had never heard of it. This is before the Watchmen TV show, before a lot of the recent attention. And so based on that, I decided I really wanted to be able to at least dive into the story a little bit and tell at least some of this story to a younger generation. So I got the Ringer to send me out to Tulsa to write an article. This is a photo from my first day in Greenwood, and this is a photo of me on my reporting trip at that time on May 31st, 2018. And so on this trip, I encountered this very small vigil that was happening, commemorating the race massacre, not commemorating, but acknowledging the race massacre. There were maybe about 24 people or so participating in this vigil and then this march. But just off frame here, to the right of this frame of this image, there were hundreds of other people in Greenwood going to a baseball game. There's actually a minor league baseball stadium in Greenwood right now, and that had clearly taken precedence at the marquee event of the evening. And so for me, I actually remember being specifically on this march portion of the evening as we're marching down Greenwood Avenue, and I'm first trying to really reckon with being in this space where this savagery occurred. The national anthem started playing from the stadium. And so just sort of the ironic tragedy of that really hit me and resonated with me and stuck with me, kind of stuck in my bones, I think. And so I go to Greenwood, I write this story, the vibes are super off, and I come back to Atlanta where I was living, but I just felt like I had to say more about this, between having a friend who was a young black entrepreneur who didn't even know about the black success, but also going to visit this community and seeing the people there ignoring the black destruction. I realized there was a narrative that I could do that would marry both of those two sides of the same coin. And so a few months later, I ended up quitting my job at The Ringer. I packed up my life in Atlanta. I made a black country music playlist, and I moved west to Tulsa. It was the year Old Town Road came out, so that was like perfect timing. I actually got really into black country music living out there. Like I know a lot about black country music now. Before Beyonce, I knew a lot about it. Anybody who wants a really good black country album, Tina Turner Turns the Country On. She made a country album before, towards the end of the Ike era, I guess you would say. And it's a really great album. It's on Spotify, so I highly recommend it. Okay, where am I? Living in Greenwood, I soon learned that modern Greenwood is a place of contradictions. Part hollowed ground, part tourist destination, part black business district, part gentrified playground. Walk these streets, and you will find plaques placed on the sidewalks denoting what was lost. West Archer Lunchroom, destroyed in 1921, never reopened. But these plaques abut luxury apartments and white-owned businesses and baseball stadiums that have little to do with Greenwood's heritage. Sometimes, hollow memorialization can be its own form of forgetting. And yet, the people of Greenwood continue to defend and honor the terrain they have left. Ed Gilman's family newspaper, the Oklahoma Eagle, the family still owns it, and they still have an office on Greenwood Avenue. Ed's son, Jim, is an 84-year-old attorney, and he's been in charge of publishing the paper for more than 40 years. And Ed's granddaughter, Regina, pictured here, is a senator in the Oklahoma State Legislature who represents the Greenwood District. When I met Regina, she was the only black woman in the legislature, and the legislature there is overwhelmingly Republican, so she was a minority within a minority within a minority. Something that Regina told me the very first time we met really stuck with me. This is Regina. A lot of folks in Tulsa did not want this history to be shared, even today. They tell us, oh, that happened in the past. You need to forget about it. If I were to forget about the past, I'd be forgetting myself. I think our families have gone through too much for us to forget about ourselves. I was shadowing Regina in the State House in 2021 when Oklahoma passed HB 1775, one of the first laws in the nation meant to curtail classroom discussions involving race, sex, and gender. It was one of those laws sort of in the beginning of this entire arc that said that if a student was feeling uncomfortable in class, a teacher could be punished in some kind of way. And so it had this really large chilling effect on the way teachers operated throughout the state. And it was interesting, I remember, because in Oklahoma, this law was passed before the national controversy began. And it was just so, and now looking back, it's so interesting to think about what's grown from that moment. At the time, actually, Oklahoma's governor insisted that schools would, quote, keep teaching history in all its complexities. Instead, the movement gestated in Oklahoma has grown to a national crisis, with the Trump White House recently decreeing that schools must engage in, quote, patriotic education or risk losing federal funding. What is patriotic education exactly? Here's a quote from the White House directive. A clear examination of how the United States has admirably gone closer to its noble principles throughout its history. The Tulsa Race Massacre challenges the notion that our nation's history is one of smooth, linear progress. But we have to understand how we got here in a truly honest way if we have any hope of moving forward. I want to end today by talking about the greatest living truth tellers of the Tulsa Race Massacre. There are two known living survivors of the event, Leslie Benefo Randall and Viola Fletcher, both 110 years old. They're pictured here along with Miss Fletcher's younger brother, Hughes Van Ellis, who was 103 years old. And so I got to meet the three of them in 2021 as part of my reporting. And it was interesting, too, because it wasn't an interview. I actually got to sort of be in community with them and their families. Thanks to Regina, actually, she invited me to this event, and this is where this photo was taken. So this wasn't a reporting trip. It was just sort of an opportunity to be with them. And I remember, I had met them before. They were 105 at that time. And I remember meeting them and just assuming that if I, blew too hard on them, they'd fall over, And Miss Fletcher in particular, Miss Fletcher's the one on the right. So I met her, and I'm coming up to talk to her and approach her. And she basically said, I'm a real person. You can talk to me like a normal person, stop all this foolishness. And so they're very much strong women. I got to see them in a lot of different contexts in Tulsa. There's a reparations lawsuit that these three survivors filed in 2020, seeking justice for what they had lost when they were children. And so there would be all these hearings going on in Tulsa for years, and they'd be there in their wheelchairs, looking the judge in the eye. Unfortunately, Hughes Van Ellis, pictured in the middle, passed away in 2023. And the lawsuit that the two living survivors filed was dismissed by Oklahoma Supreme Court last year. So a door closed. But what I realized studying Greenwood's history is that when one door closes, someone else opens up another. It has happened so many times. And so after this case has ultimately been dismissed, a group called Beyond Apology, which is a group of massacre descendants and sort of Black Tulsa stakeholders, have gotten together and gotten it sort of endorsed by the city council to present some ideas or models for reparations in Tulsa. And then in a huge shock, Tulsa elected its first ever black mayor in November on the same day President Trump was elected. And so this new mayor has actually said he's open to the idea of reparations, which is the first for any Tulsa mayor to ever say. And so this winding path towards justice reminds me of a quote by massacre survivor B.C. Franklin. Right is slow and tardy, while wrong is aggressive. In Tulsa, in Oklahoma, in America, the arbiters of so-called justice are patiently eyeing the hourglass. But their understanding of time is backwards. An untreated wound does not heal as the years go by. It festers. An unpaid debt is not wiped from the books. It accrues interest. Greenwood's ancestors, the ones who witnessed its creation and its cataclysm, must all eventually go silent. Yet their souls still stir in the voices of their descendants. And finally, people are listening. Here's me with Regina once again, something Regina told me. Whether I live to be 100 or tonight is my last moment, there's going to be a generation after me. And as long as folks are being born, we have to make sure people understand what we've got to fight for and why we've got to press onward. The story of Greenwood has been quiet for far too long. You're now carriers of this story, which is not just Black history, but American history. The terrain of the mind is under attack in our country today. But if the people of Greenwood could defend their land and their people with such courage, the least we could do is defend their legacies. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can I say one more thing?
You can say whatever you want.
Okay. I've given this version of this speech a lot of times, but y'all's energy made it hit different tonight, so thank y'all for being here. Thank you.
Thanks for your words. For those of you who are watching online, you can submit questions, and we can ask them here. You can also ask questions in the room here, and I don't know if anybody has like a right away, hand shot up right away. So think about right here we got
Okay.
So stand up, come to the microphone, please, and maybe tell us who you are a little bit. Just say your name.
Gus, live right here in Seattle. I didn't get to see you in 2023, but didn't miss it this time. I wanted to ask, I thought that was such a great point about the article being destroyed in the Tulsa paper. James Lowen's book, Sundown Towns, he says the same thing, that's actually a very wide pattern. And I just wanted you to speak to that because I hear so frequently when white people discuss racism, they say white people are ignorant about racism. Even many non-white people say that. you can't say you're ignorant if there's a wide pattern of white people destroying articles so that people can't get an accurate history of what happened. That is not ignorance. That's dedication in my view. Can you speak to that? Oh, you said this is black history. This is white history. Thank you.
Thank you, Gus. Thank you. Yeah, I know for me it was, this article has always been sort of this white whale artifact kind of thing in the academic world about researching Greenwood, because it was ripped out so early. Like, it was ripped out I think the earliest time we know that it was missing is circa the 1950s or so, and that's kind of before there's a lot of academic interest in the story. And so when historians actually really became interested in all this in the 1970s, there was a big challenge actually in finding the article. And so I believe actually if you go anywhere in Tulsa, it cannot be found, but there were some sort of like out-of-town editions of the paper that had it. But I think it's interesting the fact that even when you go to the current archives, this was pulled from newspapers.com, what I had, they were still removed. And so I do think that pattern is very much common. And something I think about building on what you said is also the fact that oftentimes we lose out on these stories in the white press that were racist or damaging, but we also lose out on a lot of black stories because there was a neglect in archiving black stories in black newspapers. So many historical societies throughout America will have a very comprehensive archive of the white press in their city, but a very scattershot archive of the black press, And so that's another challenge of this kind of research and writing, is being able to capture the black stories, because for both the Oklahoma Eagle and the Tulsa Star, many, many issues are actually missing.
Please join us.
Hi, Victor. My name's Harriet. I'm curious to know if in Oklahoma, I'm guessing Oklahoma requires its K-12 students to take 1 year of Oklahoma state history. And I'm curious to know if the current state history curriculum for this course includes any reference to Tulsa, if you know. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Harriet. So technically, the Tulsa Race, that's a big word for this next answer. Technically, the Tulsa Race Massacre is required learning as part of the Oklahoma State Educational Standards. However, I have actually spoken to a lot of Oklahoma college students as part of my travels for this, and when I ask who's heard of Tulsa Race Massacre, they don't all raise their hands. So they're not getting this education necessarily, even though it's part of the state standards. And in addition to that, Oklahoma has an extremely conservative right-wing education superintendent named Ryan Walters. And so he's been sort of on a crusade against CRT and anything remotely related to it for years. And so he actually has a quote from a couple of years ago where he said, the Tulsa Race Massacre isn't actually about race. So that's the person you have sort of overseeing education in the state. And so even though it is required technically, from my perspective, from even talking to some current young people, they're not all getting that education in the state of Oklahoma, no.
So I got a question from online. You and I were talking about choices you make in writing and what you keep in books and what you have to maybe leave out because of space constraints. And Laura online asks, is there something you came across in your research that didn't make it in, but which is really, really fun to share with people as you tell the story?
Let me think.
Or maybe not fun, but maybe important to share.
Sure. Okay, I can go down the fun. Okay, we can go on the important route instead. The book has both fun and less fun things in it. I had a lot of information about Black Power in Greenwood, which I found really fascinating. There was a Black Power office in Greenwood in the 1970s, a Black Panthers office in the 1970s, and the Black Power movement was very, very prominent. And I had a whole scene. There was actually at the University of Tulsa, there was a Black Panther who gave a lecture kind of like this one. And he said during his lecture, he called the police racist, I won't say it, racist MF pig cops. In this lecture, got arrested actually for indecency. And so I had a whole scene about that and how one of the good ones sort of defended him, and it was interesting, but it kind of was too far afield of everything that I was covering. But I do think throughout the book, I was trying to kind of show different ideas and modes and models for Black advancement. There's always a debate going on in Black America about what's the best way to progress. And so I wanted to be able to have that Black Panther ideology and contrast it with, sort of the Dr. King ideology. So there's a little bit of it in the book, but I had a lot more that I wish I had space for.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because there's a lot in the book that talks about all the assets and strengths, and that I appreciate that. We have a question from the audience here. Please join.
Hi, thank you, Victor. My name is Vidrana, and I just had a question about, kind of seems like we're back a century, and in this age of total misinformation and propaganda in the media, I just wonder how can we as citizens, as civil society, fight back against all of this and preserve truth, and how can we ensure that we don't erase history?
Thank you so much for that very, very difficult question. I would speak for myself 'cause I think it's hard. I think talking about examples maybe helps people understand some models. And so I have an email newsletter that I had for a long time when I was working on the book. And it was sort of about Oklahoma history, just updates about what I was finding out in my research. And I sort of built a large audience with that. And I really didn't know what to do with it after the book was done, because it's not going to be about Oklahoma forever. And so I've kind of actually changed it to be about sort of some of those gaps in our understanding of Black history. And I've sort of changed the format of it so that I'm basically writing these sort of 1,000-word vignettes and making them PDF that teachers can actually use. And so I think one of the challenges with trying to teach history is that Google is kind of a landmine, of a minefield. You don't know what's accurate, you don't know what's not. And so I think, for me at least, I'm trying to produce accurate, vetted information about our country's history that teachers can easily use, that's digestible for young people, that they can engage with, that'll sort of help them, even if they're getting more pressure institutionally to not teach us history, there should be sources online for them to access that if they need it. You really think about the ways that authoritarian societies function, things have to go underground a little bit, And so I think being able to find some of those models where we're distributing and handing each other information that's a little bit more underground, to be honest, is a big part of the equation.
Thanks for the talk. My question is with this history and the kind of continuous examples of organized whiteness and its ability to destroy progress seemingly at every step of the way throughout American history, can you point to any reason to be hopeful about the idea of a beloved community that whiteness seems not interested in actually having?
Thank you for the question. Again, I prefer to talk about stories and examples. That's just how I've perceived the world. So I'll talk about my little cousin. I have a teenage cousin. He worked with me on this book. His name is Stanley. I hired him when he was 13, but I thought he was 15. And I was like, whoa, this is a lot for a 13-year-old to deal with. But we're in it now, so let's go, Stanley. So Stanley ended up really engaging in a really in-depth way with all of this stuff. I actually remember talking to his mom about it before I hired him. Do you want Stanley to learn about this history at this young age? And what she said was, he's going to have to learn it sometime, so why not with you, somebody I trust, who can really guide him through this in a responsible way? And so Stanley, for years, when he was in high school, he wasn't learning nothing about this in school, but he was learning from me about the Race Massacre, about the Black experience during the World Wars. He got to analyze Race Massacre lawsuits. He really did a lot of very sophisticated adult work. So I interviewed Stanley right before he graduated high school. And I was really curious about sort of how he would have absorbed all of this sort of traumatic history. I didn't really know what to think about how he would have absorbed it. And what he told me, at least, was that he felt more connected to the past and his Blackness because he had a clear understanding of how we had gotten here, And so it wasn't necessarily that he was exactly hopeful, is not quite the right word, but I think he was, let's say, resolved, right? He understood his role as a citizen here and as a Black person to sort of keep fighting to, if we can't move the boulder up, at least maintaining where we are. And so I think, I don't know, for me, interacting with Stanley and seeing that a young person could absorb this history and come out of it being more motivated to be engaged as a citizen, I think that actually did make me hopeful. So, and also Stanley's at Princeton right now, so he's doing a great job. So.
Stanley's no joke.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to combine two questions from online. What was the most challenging part about discovering stories that were intentionally hidden from history, and how did your proximity to Tulsa when you were in residence there shape your storytelling and your learning? So
actually the most challenging research wasn't actually about the Race Massacre, because it has been researched in a lot of depth before me. It was actually much more about urban renewal. So my book, there is as much in my book about urban renewal as about the Race Massacre itself. And that was kind of me flying or walking on a tightrope kind of without a net. No one's really done that kind of research before I did in Tulsa. And so one funny story about that, so there's an urban renewal office right near Greenwood. And I remember going there, and I kind of befriended, there's a lawyers who would be like, you can't go in there, but I befriended the receptionist people. And there's literally a sign that says do not enter. So I entered. And they had all these really amazing parcel acquisition files, actually. So I got to see the actual files that the city of Tulsa and the Urban Renewal Authority used when they seized people's land. It was really, really valuable to being able to create a rich text. I wanted something similar for the interstate highway. Those are kind of separate processes, urban renewal and the interstate. But I FOIA'd or sent an information request to the Oklahoma Department of Transportation trying to get, really what I wanted to know is, when did y'all decide to put this highway in the middle of this neighborhood? And surely, if we're just thinking logically, there must have been a meeting one day where they said, let's put it here. That's how you plan things. And so I sent this information request, and they sent me 5,000 pages of documents. But none of it has that information. Nowhere do they have the meeting minutes of the meeting where they decided, put it right there in that black neighborhood. And so I think that kind of showed, that was really challenging for me to sort of get the information I really needed to illustrate some of those decisions. And then the other part of the question was?
Living in residence.
Yeah, so I made this decision to become a black country music fan and live in Tulsa. And really the motivation was, so as a reporter previously, I've sort of been a practitioner of what we call in the industry parachute journalism. Anybody heard that term before, parachute journalism? So parachute journalism is when, for example, a school shooting happens and national reporters parachute into a community, get all the news they can for a few days, then leave. And so I was doing that kind of thing when I worked at Time Magazine at The Ringer. And my first story about this was an example of parachute journalism. And I realized if I was going to go in depth with a book, that wouldn't work. I couldn't just be flying in and out every once in a while. And so really embedding there and sort of committing myself to the community, I knew it would help build people's commitment to me and my work as well. And so that was really, really vital for me to sort of make that leap.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Hey, my name is Matt. I'm a high school teacher in a suburban community across the lake. We teach this. We teach 3 or 4 days on it, right? And I'm present to what it means to have it come through my filter, and I'm curious, what would you want kids to walk away from this story with? What do I need to make sure kids get out of this version?
First off, thank you so much for teaching this topic. A lot of teachers don't do it, so thank you.
It's important.
I think that, yeah, no, thank you. I think one of the most affecting things you can do that's also, I think, easy for young people to connect with is firsthand accounts. And so there's the book I mentioned by Mary Jones Parrish, Events of the Tulsa Disaster. It has 20 firsthand accounts that are very easy to read and understand from people who survived the race massacre. And these are accounts that were written right afterwards, So it has a lot of urgency to it when you read that. And Mary Jones Parrish's great-granddaughter actually republished the book recently. So it's actually available on Amazon or wherever. It's called The Nation Must Awake. And so I think using a text like that, that's really accessible, easy to understand, but has this weight to it because it's vital, it's current, it is the truth, I think it's really good for students, and also I think it's harder to argue against by the powers that be. People can be like, well, Victor with his liberal agenda, what's he up to? But you can't really say that about first-hand accounts from people who survived it. So I really think that book, The Nation Must Awake, is something I'd recommend looking at possibly for your students.
We teach it as a mixer, and so kids get to interview all the individuals. We have 25 individuals. It works pretty well.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dan. I've been a Bothell resident for 25 years. I'm from Oklahoma. I was born and raised in Oklahoma. I went to college in Oklahoma. I never heard about the Tulsa Massacre.
Wow.
I went to the Air Force, and I took a Black History course in Sacramento, and it talked about the Tulsa Massacre. The next day, I didn't believe what they said, because they said, wait a minute, I'm from Oklahoma, I never heard about it.
Right.
I don't believe what you're saying.
Right.
So I called my mom, and I said, they were talking about the Tulsa Massacre, and we've never heard of it. And she says, yeah, it happened. She said, but her mother told her not to talk about it because it was too painful, and that they wanted to move forward. My question to you is that some of the information when you've gathered, when you've talked to survivors and their dependents, the descendants, as to some of the reasons why they didn't talk about it? Because this is something that give me a break. Our families never knew about this. And my hometown is 3 hours from Tulsa. And not only that, but in college, I had Tulsa friends.
Yeah.
So they never knew about it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for the question and for sharing your story. Thank you. Yes, I've actually heard that from literally every generation of Tulsan, people who are 70 or 80, people who are 50, people who are 30 or 40. I've heard some variation of that story. And I do think one quote that really sticks with me is A.J. Smitherman, who I talked about. I interviewed his descendants at one point in my reporting, and one of his great-granddaughters said that our inheritance should have been generational wealth. Instead, it was generational trauma. And so I think that it's sort of instinctual for a parent not to want to pass on generational trauma, to their children. And so I think that was, in many ways, one of the motivations. There also, I think, was a legitimate fear when you think about the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, let's keep going, 70s, 80s in Tulsa. I mentioned here that people received death threats in the 70s for talking about this openly. And so I think there was, I think, not wanting to burden their children, but also wanting to keep them safe in a very real, tangible way, which is one of the reasons that a lot of people I talked to, even in Greenwood, in the black community, didn't know very much about this at all until the last couple of decades.
So I'm going to take prerogative and ask one question, and we'll finish one online. My question for you, when we're doing work in communities, we often have this tension about how to balance what we're learning and gathering versus what we give back. And I know you and I have talked a little bit about the way that you gave back to the community, the way you gave back to the families as part of your work. And I wonder if you could just share with us a few of the ways that you were kind of doing that work and that kind of exchange.
Sure. So I think I had to kind of have a reckoning with myself when I started this project and when I quit my journalism job. When you sort of get reared in the world of journalism, righteousness is very much part of the mythology of journalism, and you don't really have to think too much about anything else besides getting the truth, But when I sort of quit my job and started having a look at these bank account every month, I was like, I'm more of a businessman now. And I had to think more about the finances of how I was getting money and who was benefiting, who wasn't, And so it made me sort of realize and sort of come to terms with the fact that journalism is a very extractive profession. At the end of the day, I'm getting someone's story, repackaging it, and get a product that someone might read or buy or what have you. And so I had to sort of think about, okay, I can't really sort of change that dynamic foundationally, but maybe I can sort of contribute in some way to sort of counteract the ledger, And so I had a few different sort of modes and models for that. One, I'll tell this short story. In the Goodwin family, that's Ed the Hustler, Regina the Legislator, that family. There was an elder in the family named Jean who lives in Nashville, and she was the keeper of the family history. And everybody told me, Jean ain't never going to talk to you. She keeps her stuff private. She keeps it locked down. You're an outsider. This is people in her family telling me this. Like, she's not going to talk to you. And so I had to kind of figure out how do I approach this woman and build trust with her. And so eventually I ended up mailing her a handwritten letter sort of describing my intentions and how I was trying to tell an authentic story. I had to relearn cursive and everything. But more important than the letter, I also gave her some artifacts she didn't have of their family. Like, I found a photo of her grandfather and father she didn't have. I sent that to her. I found articles about how her grandmother founded Greenwood's PTA. I sent that to her. And so she was actually getting to expand her own legacy through working with me. And so that felt much more collaborative than me just getting to take her photos and everything else. The other thing I'll mention here, because we're a room of researchers and historians and archivists. Whenever I could, there's a lot of photos in my book, like 100 photos probably. And so whenever I could, I licensed the photos from the families instead of from museums. Because in many cases, these families 30, 40 years ago gave these photos to the museums for nothing. And so the museums get to profit off of them in some kinds of ways. So wherever I could, if I knew that this family was actually the origin of the photo, I would pay them and license them for the images instead of doing it for the museum. Because I think it's really important, especially with black history, that black folks really come to understand and own the fact that their history has value. And so I was trying to make sure that my models would sort of help create new models in that mindset.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. So the last question, we'll have to chat with Victor after. We want you to go out and get the book. We want you to subscribe to the newsletter.
Yeah, run it back. I think there's a sign-up sheet somewhere.
There is a sign-up sheet.
Yes.
But several people online, and probably a lot of us in the audience, want to hear what's up next for you, and what should we keep an eye out for from the Victor Luckerson experience? Sure.
So I haven't quite decided exactly what the next project is going to be precisely, but I do know that I want to be able to focus on that gap, that 100-year gap in our understanding of Black history. You know, when you learn Black history in school, the Civil War happens, and there's a 100-year gap, and Rosa Parks sits down on the bus. And we're just kind of missing from the story. You know, we're out of the mix for a long time. We need to get back in the mix. And so I want to write new projects that continue to fill in those gaps of our story. I think some of those stories can be tragic, like the massacre, but some of them can also be triumphant and inspiring and joyful. So I think finding a mix of stories that capture the good and bad of that experience over that 100 years, that'll be my goal going forward.
Well, we're going to look forward to all that. Please join me in thanking Victor for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you to the graduate school and Yvette and Kate for all the work they did putting this together. And we'll see you at the reception here.